The Alpha King's legendary werewolf should have died on the very first night. He couldn't see. He couldn't hunt. And somewhere beneath the endless snow of the northern wilderness, the beast that had survived 100 wars lay trembling at the feet of an Omega who barely had enough strength to keep herself alive. She searched every cupboard, every pouch, every bundle of dried herbs. Nothing. No medicine. No food. No miracle. Only a blind wolf whose breathing grew weaker each time the fire burned lower. When dawn threatened to take his last breath, she made a choice no one would ever believe. For 40 nights, she kept the dying beast alive with her own milk. She whispered to him when he whimpered, held his head when nightmares made him thrash, and never once imagined the scarred creature sleeping beside her wasn't an ordinary wolf at all. He was the Alpha King's most feared war companion, the Beast Kingdoms called invincible. Then something even stranger began to happen. Every night, while she cradled the blinded wolf in her arms, the Alpha King woke from the same dream. He had never seen the woman's face, yet he could hear her heartbeat. He could smell pine smoke, warm milk, and the impossible feeling that someone was saving a part of his soul from hundreds of miles away. His generals believed grief had broken him. His priests called the dreams a curse. But when the war wolf failed to return for the 40th sunrise, the Alpha King stopped waiting. He ordered the entire north searched, not for the beast, but for the unknown Omega who had already entered his dreams before she had ever entered his life. Neither of them knew the truth. The wolf had not wandered into her cabin by chance. Someone or something had led him there. And when the Alpha King finally reached that lonely cabin buried beneath the snow, he would discover that the woman who had saved his oldest companion was carrying a secret capable of bringing an entire kingdom to its knees. Winter had forgotten mercy. The northern frontier lay buried beneath an endless ocean of white, where mountains disappeared behind walls of drifting snow and ancient pine forests groaned beneath the weight of frozen silence. The wind howled through broken branches like grieving spirits, carrying with it the scent of ice, old blood, and forgotten promises. No traveler crossed these lands willingly. Only those with nowhere else to go ever remained. Hidden among towering pines stood a small cabin built from weathered timber and stubborn determination. Smoke curled weakly from its crooked chimney before vanishing into the gray sky, as though even warmth feared lingering too long in this place. Inside, the fire crackled softly. Its fading orange glow painted gentle shadows across rough wooden walls lined with drying herbs, empty shelves, and carefully mended blankets that had survived far more winters than they should have. Ira Ashwin knelt beside the hearth, feeding another splinter of firewood into the flames. The cabin smelled faintly of cedar, wild lavender, and snow carried in through countless drafts that slipped between aging logs. She wrapped her thin woolen shawl tighter around herself. Another storm was coming. She could feel it. The old healer, who had once taken her in before dying, had always said certain Omegas could hear winter breathing. Tonight, winter sounded angry. Ira reached toward the small iron pot hanging above the fire. Empty. Again. The last roots she had gathered weeks ago had already been boiled into soup. Even the dried berries were gone. She smiled sadly. She had learned years ago that hunger was quieter when welcomed like an old friend. Outside, the wind suddenly stopped. Silence settled over the forest so completely that even the fire seemed to hesitate. Ira frowned. That wasn't natural. Animals always made noise before storms. Owls hunted. Foxes called. Branches creaked beneath wandering deer. But now, nothing. Not even the whisper of falling snow. Then, a sound. Barely audible. A slow, broken breath. Her head snapped toward the cabin door. Another breath followed. Long. Painful. Almost human. She stood immediately. Every instinct warned her not to open the door. Bandits often used wounded cries to lure lonely travelers outside. But something about this sound felt different. Not desperate. Not deceptive. Lonely. She reached for the old lantern hanging beside the entrance. Its warm glow pushed against the darkness as she slowly lifted the wooden bar securing the door. The icy wind burst inside. Snow swirled across the floor. For one suspended heartbeat,
She saw nothing.
Only white. Then the lantern light drifted downward. And she froze. A wolf.
No.
Not merely a wolf. The largest creature she had ever seen. His black fur was buried beneath layers of frozen blood. Deep claw wounds crossed his ribs. One ear had been torn nearly in half. Old arrows still protruded from scarred flesh where they had snapped during forgotten battles. Most heartbreaking of all, his silver eyes stared into nothing. Clouded.
Blind.
Yet despite his condition, the beast still tried to stand. His trembling legs buckled beneath him. A low growl escaped his throat, not threatening, defiant, as though even death itself would have to fight him for victory. Ira's breath caught. What happened to you? The wolf couldn't answer. He simply collapsed against the snow with a heavy thud that shook the porch beneath him. His breathing became slower, shallower. She knelt beside him without thinking. The fur beneath her fingers felt cold enough to burn.
His heartbeat. Weak.
Far too weak. She examined his wounds with practiced hands.
Poison.
Old infection. Starvation. Blindness caused by venom. Whoever had done this hadn't simply wanted the wolf dead. They had wanted him to suffer first. Her jaw tightened. There are monsters worse than wolves. The beast flinched as her fingers brushed another wound. Even blind, he turned toward her voice. Not with hatred. With confusion. As though he couldn't understand why gentle hands had touched him after so much pain. Ira hurried inside and returned carrying every herb she still possessed. She crushed bitter leaves into warm water, cleaned infected wounds, pulled broken arrowheads free one by one. Each time she expected the wolf to bite. Each time, he endured the agony in silence. Hours passed. Night swallowed the forest. The fire burned lower. Ira leaned back, exhausted. Every herb was gone. Every bandage had been used. Still, the wolf continued fading. She checked his pulse again.
Slower.
His breathing weakened. His body had begun shutting down. No, she whispered. No, please. She searched every shelf, every cupboard, every basket. Nothing remained. No medicine. No goat's milk. No preserved broth. Nothing capable of keeping him alive until morning. She looked toward the wolf. He no longer growled. He no longer moved. Only the slow rise and fall of his chest proved he still clung to life. Tears gathered in her eyes. She had watched too many creatures die alone. Not again. Never again. Her trembling hands rested unconsciously over her own chest. She understood. The realization struck with equal parts horror and certainty. It was the only way. Heat flooded her face. The Moon Mother's oldest teachings echoed inside her memory. Life given freely carries greater healing than any herb. She had always believed those words were symbolic. Until tonight. The wolf's breathing faltered. Another few minutes, and there would be nothing left to save. Ira closed her eyes. I'm sorry if this is foolish. The words barely rose above a whisper. But I can't let you die. She gently lifted the wolf's enormous head into her lap. Despite weighing more than a grown man, he offered no resistance. Almost as though, even unconscious, he trusted her. The cabin fell silent except for crackling firewood and the storm pounding against the walls. Time seemed to stop. The beast's instincts fought against helplessness for only a heartbeat before surrendering. Warmth slowly returned to his frozen body. His breathing steadied. Weakly, painfully, but undeniably.
Alive.
Ira leaned back against the wall, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, not from shame, but from overwhelming relief. You'll live, she whispered, brushing trembling fingers through the thick black fur around his neck. You hear me? You'll live. Outside, the blizzard raged harder than ever. Yet for the first time in weeks, the cabin no longer felt empty. Hours later, long after exhaustion forced Ira into restless sleep beside the hearth, the wolf stirred. Blind eyes remained closed, but his nose lifted slightly. He breathed in the scent surrounding him. Smoke, pinewood, lavender, and the gentle heartbeat of the woman who had chosen compassion over fear. Far beyond the frozen mountains, Inside the towering obsidian walls of Iron Fang Palace, King Kael Draven awoke with a violent gasp. His silver eyes flew open. His heartbeat thundered. For the first time in 7 years, he had dreamed of Fenrir. Not dying, not bleeding, not screaming.
Alive.
Curled beside a woman wrapped in moonlight, Kaelin slowly pressed a trembling hand against his chest. He could still hear her heartbeat. He could still smell warm cedar smoke. And somewhere deep within the invisible bond that had once connected him to his legendary werewolf, something stirred. Not fully awakened. Not yet. But alive. The Alpha King stared into the darkness beyond his chamber windows. Then, without understanding why, he whispered into the empty night. Find him. Outside the palace, the first wolf howl in 40 days echoed across the sleeping kingdom. Dawn never truly arrived in the northern kingdom. It merely softened the darkness. A pale silver light spread across the endless snowfields, turning the frozen wilderness into an ocean of shimmering white beneath a sky hidden behind heavy clouds. Frost clung to every pine branch like shattered glass, while icy winds carried whispers through the forest that sounded almost like forgotten prayers. Inside the lonely cabin, the warmth of the fireplace battled against winter's relentless breath. Iris stirred before sunrise. She had barely slept. For 40 nights, she had remained beside the wounded wolf, waking every few hours to clean his wounds, warm his body, and keep him alive through the longest winter she had ever endured. 40 nights. 40 days. 40 silent promises made to a creature who could never thank her. She slowly sat upright, rubbing the stiffness from her aching shoulders. The enormous black wolf still rested beside the fire. Only, something had changed. His breathing had become deep,
Steady.
powerful. The shallow gasps that had haunted every night were gone. His ribs no longer trembled beneath each breath. His body, once so frighteningly cold, now radiated quiet warmth. Iris smiled despite her exhaustion. You fought harder than anyone I've ever known. She reached toward his neck, gently brushing tangled fur away from another healing scar. Before her fingers touched him, his eyes opened.
Silver.
Not clouded, not lifeless. Brilliant. 2 glowing moons stared directly into hers. Ira froze. So, her voice barely escaped. You can see. The wolf didn't move. He simply looked at her, not like an animal, like someone remembering. Those silver eyes traveled across her face with quiet recognition, lingering on the exhaustion beneath her eyes and the fading bruises on her wrists earned from gathering firewood through the storm. Then something extraordinary happened. The massive beast lowered his head. Slowly, deliberately, until his forehead rested gently against her lap. It was not submission. It was gratitude. A single tear escaped Ira's eye before she could stop it. You don't have to thank me. The wolf closed his eyes. His powerful tail gave one slow sweep across the wooden floor. Outside, the forest awakened. Birds returned. Snow rabbits emerged from hidden burrows. Even the wind seemed softer. For the first time in weeks, life had returned to the northern woods. Hundreds of miles away, Iron Fang Palace stood like a mountain carved from black stone. Its towers pierced the storm clouds, wrapped in banners bearing the silver crest of the Wolf Kingdom. The fortress had survived centuries of war. So had the man who ruled it. King Kael Draven stood alone upon the eastern balcony, overlooking his capital. The city below was already awake. Smiths hammered steel. Soldiers marched through frozen streets. Merchants prepared for another bitter day beneath the Alpha King's rule. No laughter echoed through the city. Only discipline.
Fear.
Order. Exactly as Kael demanded. Yet today, none of it mattered. He had not slept since waking from the impossible dream. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her again. A woman kneeling beside a fire. White hair glowing like moonlight. Gentle hands buried inside black fur. A heartbeat.
Soft. Steady.
Comforting. The same heartbeat still echoed somewhere deep inside him. His fingers tightened around the icy stone railing. Impossible. His bond had died with Fenrir. He had buried that part of himself 7 years ago. A knock interrupted the silence. Your Majesty. General Magnus entered before receiving permission. Only a handful of men dared such disrespect. Magnus had earned that privilege over decades of loyalty. His weathered armor still carried scars from battles fought beside both Kaelin and Fenrir. There has been no sign? Kaelin asked without turning. Magnus lowered his head. Our northern patrols searched every valley. Nothing. Our eastern scouts questioned every village. Nothing. The southern hunters found only abandoned battlefields.
Silence.
Finally Magnus spoke again. Majesty. Perhaps it is time. Kaelin's voice became ice. Finish that sentence. The old general hesitated. To accept Fenrir is gone. The words echoed across the balcony. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then, the stone railing cracked beneath Kaelin's bare hand. Chunks of black granite fell 300 feet onto the frozen courtyard below. I buried my brother. His voice remained frighteningly calm. I watched him die. I buried half this kingdom. I buried every piece of myself worth saving.
He slowly turned.
Silver eyes burned with quiet fury. But I never buried Fenrir. Because I never found his body. Magnus lowered his gaze. The king stepped closer. If the bond still breathes. His hand pressed against his chest. Then he breathes. Neither man noticed someone listening beyond the half-open doorway. Lady Seraphine Volcrest. Beautiful. Elegant.
Deadly.
Her crimson gown flowed like fresh blood against polished marble floors. Golden hair framed a face capable of convincing entire kingdoms she possessed nothing but kindness. Only her emerald eyes betrayed the calculating intelligence hidden beneath that flawless smile. So, the rumors were true. The king had become obsessed. Not with power. Not with conquest. With a dream. She quietly slipped away before anyone sensed her presence. A queen never ignored weakness. She weaponized it. Back inside the northern wilderness, Fenrir stepped outside the cabin for the first time. Fresh snow crunched beneath paws that had once shaken battlefields. The forest became silent. Every creature watched. Deer stood frozen among distant trees. Foxes lowered themselves to the ground. Even ravens ceased calling. The legendary war wolf had returned. Fenrir lifted his nose. The icy wind carried thousands of scents. Pine.
Snow.
Rabbit. Wolf. Human.
Then,
Another smell. Steel.
blood.
Smoke. Men. His ears flattened. Low growls vibrated through his chest. Ira noticed immediately. What is it? Fenrir moved in front of her. Protecting.
The growl deepened. Closer now.
Hoofs. Several. No. Many. The distant thunder of horses echoed between frozen cliffs. Ira's heartbeat quickened. Hunters? Bandits? Slave traders? She couldn't know. But Fenrir already did. Every muscle beneath his black fur tightened. The peaceful creature she had known for 40 days disappeared. In his place stood the legendary war beast feared across kingdoms. The air itself seemed to tremble around him. His silver eyes narrowed toward the southern ridge. A heartbeat later, nearly 20 armed raiders burst through the trees. Their horses snorted clouds of white mist. Axes gleamed beneath pale sunlight. Scarred faces twisted into greedy smiles. Their leader laughed. Well, he stared directly at Ira. So, the little Omega wasn't just hiding. His eyes shifted toward Fenrir. She found herself quite the prize. Another man spat into the snow. Kill the wolf. Take the girl. Fenrir took one silent step forward. No bark. No warning. Only absolute certainty. The raiders suddenly felt something they hadn't expected.
Fear.
Real fear. One younger rider whispered, Captain, I know that wolf. The captain frowned. What? The young man's face turned white. I've seen drawings. That's not a normal beast. His voice shook. That's Fenrir. Silence. The name spread through the group like poison. Impossible. Fenrir was dead. Everyone knew he was dead. The captain forced a laugh. Legends don't bleed. He raised his axe. Charge. The horses lunged forward. Ira's heart stopped. But Fenrir never moved. Not until the first rider came within striking distance. Then, the black wolf vanished.
A blur.
A shadow. A living storm. The first horse screamed. The second rider flew through the air before realizing he'd been hit.
Steel shattered.
Snow exploded upward. The forest erupted into chaos. And hundreds of miles away, King Kael suddenly staggered inside the palace throne room. His hand flew to his chest. He could feel it. Every heartbeat. Every movement. Every pulse of battle. His eyes widened. Fenrir. The bond was alive. And for the first time in 7 years, it was calling him home. The battle lasted less than a minute. When the last echo of steel disappeared into the frozen forest, silence returned as suddenly as it had been broken. Snow drifted lazily through the pale morning light, settling upon shattered shields, broken spears, and the unconscious bodies of raiders who had underestimated a legend. Fenrir stood in the center of the clearing. His black fur rose with each measured breath. Fresh blood stained his muzzle, not from hunger, but from duty. None of the men were dead. The legendary werewolf had chosen restraint. Every strike had been precise. Every attack had disarmed rather than slaughtered. It was something Lyra had never imagined possible. She had seen wolves hunt. She had seen desperate men kill. But this was discipline forged by years beside a king. Fenrir slowly turned toward her. The terrifying beast that had moments earlier scattered armed raiders now lowered his head the moment their eyes met. His expression softened. His tail gave one quiet sweep across the snow, as though asking a single silent question. "Are you safe?" Lyra exhaled the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I'm all right." She reached forward, her fingers sinking into the thick fur beneath his jaw. "You protected me again." The enormous wolf leaned gently into her touch, not demanding affection, accepting it. Far above the trees, a flock of ravens suddenly burst into the sky. Fenrir's ears twitched. Someone else was coming. Not raiders. Something far more dangerous. 3 days later, the northern wilderness had become strangely alive. Wolf tracks appeared where none had existed before. Silver-furred scouts watched silently from distant ridges. Hunters reported entire packs moving south together. Even the oldest villagers whispered the same impossible rumor. The king's wolves are searching for someone. None of them knew they were right. At Ironfang Palace, King Kael Dreadmore no longer resembled the ruler his court had feared for years. He had abandoned council meetings. Military reports lay untouched across the war table. Letters from neighboring kingdoms remained sealed. Every waking hour was consumed by one impossible sensation.
The bond.
It had grown stronger every sunrise. No longer vague dreams. Now, he felt warmth. He heard laughter. He smelled fresh pine smoke. Sometimes, he even caught fleeting emotions that did not belong to him. Gentleness. Loneliness. Compassion. They were foreign feelings. Yet somehow, they soothed the endless storm inside him. Kael stood before the enormous map of the Northern Territories. His silver eyes scanned every mountain pass, every abandoned village, every forgotten trail. There. His finger stopped over a remote stretch of wilderness. General Magnus frowned. "Majesty?" Kael didn't answer immediately. He simply closed his eyes. The invisible thread inside his soul pulled gently toward the northwest. "I know she's there." Magnus exchanged uneasy glances with the royal advisors.
She.
Not Fenrir. The king had stopped speaking only of the wolf. Now, there was someone else. Someone none of them had ever seen. Across the throne room, Lady Seraphine watched in complete silence. She noticed everything. The king's sleepless eyes, his distracted breathing, the way his hand unconsciously rested above his heart whenever the invisible bond stirred. She had spent 6 years studying Kael, long enough to recognize something terrifying. This wasn't obsession. It was attachment. Real attachment. And attachment made powerful men predictable. She smiled, almost imperceptibly, then gracefully approached the throne. "Your Majesty." Kael barely acknowledged her. "You wish to speak." Her voice flowed like warm honey. There are whispers spreading through the capital. I don't concern myself with whispers. Perhaps you should. That caught his attention. She stepped closer. The nobles believe an unknown Omega has bewitched you. Silence. The merchants believe the gods are punishing the kingdom. Another pause. And the military. Her words became softer. Believes you're preparing to abandon the throne. The temperature inside the throne room seemed to drop. Every advisor lowered their eyes. Kaelin slowly turned. The coldness in a silver gaze had made seasoned warriors lose the ability to speak. What do you believe? Seraphine met his eyes without flinching. I believe grief can make even the strongest alpha vulnerable. It was a carefully chosen answer. Not agreement. Not denial. Enough truth to earn trust. Enough concern to hide manipulation. Kaelin looked away first. I leave before sunrise. The entire court stiffened. Magnus stepped forward. Majesty, the Eastern Alliance arrives tomorrow. They can wait. The Western Treaty can wait. The Council. They can all wait. His voice thundered across the chamber. My wolf lives. No one dared argue. Not after hearing those words. Kaelin descended the steps of the throne. Each footstep echoed through polished black stone. If any kingdom wishes to challenge my absence. His silver eyes swept across every noble present. They're welcome to try. No one spoke. No one breathed. The Alpha King walked away. His black cloak disappeared beyond towering doors. Only after they closed did the court begin whispering. Exactly as Seraphine wanted. North of the capital, Iowa was gathering medicinal roots beneath towering pines. Fenrir followed several paces behind. Not because she needed protection. Because he refused to let her disappear from his sight. The great wolf had become strangely gentle. Every morning, he hunted enough food for them both. Every evening, he lay beside the cabin door, before she even asked. Sometimes, she caught him watching her with almost painful intensity, as though he feared blinking. She laughed softly.
What?
Fenrir tilted his head. You still don't trust I'll stay? The wolf released a low rumble that almost sounded offended. She smiled. I suppose I wouldn't leave either. For the first time in years, the forest no longer felt lonely. That afternoon, snow began falling again. Small flakes drifted lazily between ancient trees. Ira knelt beside a frozen stream collecting winter moss. Then, Fenrir froze. Every instinct inside him sharpened. His ears lifted. His muscles tensed. The wind had changed. He smelled them before they appeared. Not enemies. Wolves. Dozens. No, hundreds. From every direction, the forest slowly came alive. Gray wolves emerged first. Then silver. Then white. Massive warriors bearing ancient scars stepped silently between snow-covered pines. Each one wore the unmistakable posture of trained royal guardians. Iris stood slowly. Her heart pounded. They weren't hunting. They weren't growling. They simply watched. Then, one by one, every wolf lowered its head toward Fenrir. The legendary war wolf answered with a quiet rumble. The pack had found its commander. Tears unexpectedly filled Ira's eyes. So, she whispered, this is your family. Fenrir looked toward her, then toward the gathered wolves. Instead of leaving, he walked back to her side. The entire pack followed, choosing her, protecting her. The ground trembled, not from wolves, from horses. Many horses. This time, far more than raiders. Steel armor flashed between the trees. Royal banners bearing the silver wolf crest emerged through the snowfall. Hundreds of elite soldiers surrounded the clearing with disciplined precision. At their center rode a towering black stallion. Its rider wore obsidian armor trimmed with silver fur. His face was partly hidden beneath a dark cloak. Yet the moment his horse stopped, every wolf in the forest became perfectly still. Even the wind seemed to bow. Kaelin Dreadmore had arrived. His eyes searched the clearing. First the wolves, then Fenrir. The king's breath caught. His oldest companion was alive, healthy, standing proudly beneath falling snow. Relief struck him so violently that, for one dangerous heartbeat, He forgot he was king, forgot the soldiers, forgot the court, forgot everything except the impossible miracle before him. Fenrir. His voice cracked. The wolf lifted his head. Slowly, deliberately, he walked forward. Kaelin's heart pounded harder with every step. 7 years. 7 years of grief. 7 years of searching. 7 years of believing he had failed the one soul who had never abandoned him. He slid from his horse before anyone could stop him. Snow crunched beneath heavy boots. The distance between them disappeared. Only a few steps remained. Kaelin reached out his hand. Come home. Fenrir stopped. His silver eyes lingered on the king's outstretched hand. The soldiers smiled. General Magnus quietly wiped moisture from his eyes. The impossible had happened. Until Fenrir turned away. Without hesitation. Without uncertainty. He calmly walked past the Alpha King. Past the soldiers. Past the royal banners. Straight toward Lyra. The enormous wolf sat beside her. Then gently pressed his head against her shoulder. The clearing fell into stunned silence. Every royal wolf copied him. One after another. Hundreds of wolves moved toward the lonely Omega. Within seconds, she stood surrounded by an ocean of kneeling wolves. The Alpha King's greatest army had chosen to protect one forgotten girl. Kaelin stared at her. For the first time, their eyes met. The same silver heartbeat from his dreams thundered through his chest. The scent of cedar, pine smoke, warm milk, moonlight. It was her. The woman who had haunted every dream. Lyra's breath caught as she looked into the king's storm-colored eyes. She had expected gratitude. She had expected questions. She had never expected the terrifying Alpha King to look at her, as though he had finally found the missing half of his soul. Behind the silent ranks of soldiers, Lady Seraphine slowly arrived in her carriage. She watched the impossible scene unfold. The king's eyes never left the Omega. And in that single moment, Seraphine understood something that chilled even her calculating heart. She was no longer competing for a crown. She was competing against destiny itself. And destiny was infinitely harder to kill. The forest held its breath. Snow drifted lazily between towering pines, settling upon black armor, silver wolf fur, and the untouched footprints separating two lives that destiny had finally forced together. Neither Lyra nor King Kaelin spoke. The silence itself became a conversation. She had imagined the Alpha King countless times over the years. The northern villages told endless stories about him. The beast of Iron Fang. The king who never smiled. The Alpha whose roar had ended wars before swords were ever drawn. Children were warned that if they wandered too far into the forest, the Black King would find them before the wolves did. Yet the man standing before her looked nothing like the monster she had imagined. He looked
exhausted.
His broad shoulders still carried the weight of countless victories, but behind his silver eyes lived a loneliness so profound it seemed older than the kingdom itself. Kaelin studied her just as carefully. She wasn't what the court would have expected. No jeweled gown. No noble escort. No carefully rehearsed elegance. Only a simple wool cloak patched so many times its original color had disappeared beneath years of careful stitching. Snowflakes settled in her long white hair like tiny stars. Her pale blue eyes carried neither fear nor ambition. Only quiet kindness. The same kindness that had somehow reached through a soul bond and softened nightmares that 7 years of prayer had failed to silence. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Fenrir quietly walked between them. The great wolf nudged Kaelin's hand. Then Lyra's. Then looked back and forth between them with unmistakable impatience. General Magnus let out the smallest laugh. I believe, he murmured under his breath. He's introducing you. Even Kaelin almost smiled. Almost. He lowered himself onto one knee before Fenrir, pressing his forehead gently against the wolf's. I'm sorry. The words were so quiet only Fenrir heard them. I couldn't find you. Fenrir answered with a deep rumble before licking the king's scarred hand exactly as he had done since Kaelin was a boy. Years of grief dissolved inside that single gesture. When Kaelin finally stood, his gaze returned to Lyra. You saved him. It wasn't a question. She nodded softly. He found me. The king shook his head.
No.
His voice carried surprising conviction. He chose you. Ira lowered her eyes. I only did what anyone should. Kaelin almost laughed. No one else did. His words lingered in the cold air. No accusation. Only truth. 2 days later. The road to Iron Fong Palace stretched endlessly beneath gray skies. Ira rode inside a royal carriage, wrapped in thick furs she still felt uncomfortable wearing. Fenrir refused to travel anywhere except beside her carriage. Whenever soldiers attempted to guide him closer to the king, the great wolf calmly returned to Ira's side. Eventually, everyone stopped trying. Inside the carriage, Ira watched frozen villages disappear beyond the windows. Children waved. Mothers bowed. Old veterans placed fists over their hearts upon recognizing Fenrir. Yet whenever their eyes found Ira, confusion replaced admiration. Who was she? Why would the king's legendary companion refuse to leave an unknown Omega? Rumors began before sunset. By nightfall, the entire northern road buzzed with impossible stories. The king's wolf belongs to another. A mountain which has enchanted the royal beast. The Moon Mother has chosen a forgotten Omega. Every mile toward the capital multiplied the whispers. Lady Seraphine made certain of it. Iron Fong Palace rose from the mountains like a fortress carved by giants. Black towers pierced the clouds. Silver banners snapped violently in the winter wind. Massive iron gates opened with a thunderous groan that echoed across the frozen valley. Ira instinctively shrank back. The castle was magnificent.
It was also terrifying.
Every polished hallway reminded her she did not belong. Marble floors reflected crystal chandeliers. Towering statues of ancient Alpha Kings watched silently from every corridor. Servants immediately stopped working as she passed. Their eyes lingered on her patched cloak despite the royal carriage. Whispers followed. That's her. The Omega. The one with the wolf. She doesn't even look noble. Ira kept walking. She had survived far worse than whispers. But they still hurt. From the second-floor gallery, Seraphine observed every reaction.
Perfect.
Exactly as planned. She hadn't ordered anyone to mock the Omega.
She didn't need to.
Pride always did her work for her. A queen-in-waiting understood that cruelty was most effective when people believed it was their own idea. She smiled gently. Then descended the grand staircase. Welcome to Iron Fong Palace. Her voice was warm, elegant, almost comforting. Ira looked relieved to finally see a kind face. Seraphine embraced her lightly. You must be exhausted. I thank you. It cannot have been easy.
No.
It won't be. For just a heartbeat, those emerald eyes became cold enough to freeze blood. Then the warmth returned so quickly Ira wondered if she had imagined it. You'll learn. That evening, the royal banquet filled the great hall with music, laughter, and glittering candlelight. Hundreds of nobles gathered beneath vaulted ceilings painted with victories from centuries past. Golden goblets clinked. Silks shimmered. Perfume masked the scent of politics. Ira had never seen so much wealth gathered in one place. It made her feel smaller with every step. Kaelin noticed immediately. Without asking, he slowed his pace so she never walked alone. He never touched her, never reached for her hand. Yet somehow every noble understood. The king was watching. That alone was enough to silence many whispers. Not all. A young Alpha Lord lifted his wine. Your Majesty. Kaelin turned. The noble smiled politely. If I may ask. His eyes drifted toward Ira. Is it now royal custom to invite stray Omegas into the palace? Several nearby nobles chuckled. Ira lowered her gaze. Old memories flooded back. Worthless. Barren. Unwanted. The words returned exactly as they had years ago. Kaelin slowly placed his goblet onto the banquet table. The sound echoed through the hall.
Once. Twice.
Silence spread. Every musician stopped playing. The king approached the young lord.
Calmly.
So. His voice remained terrifyingly soft. You find that amusing? The noble swallowed. I meant no offense. You compared my honored guest to an animal. You laughed. My king. Kaelin stopped inches away. The temperature inside the hall seemed to plummet. If Fenrir had chosen you, he said quietly, I would have believed the gods themselves had spoken. His eyes narrowed. But he chose her. Another step. So tell me. His voice dropped lower. Which one of you should I question? The woman trusted by the greatest wolf who has ever lived, or the noble too blind to recognize her worth? No one answered. No one dared. The young lord slowly lowered himself onto one knee. My deepest apologies. Kaelin never looked at him again. Instead, he turned toward Ira. You will never bow your head in this palace again. Their eyes met. Something warm stirred inside Ira's chest. No one had ever defended her before. Not once. Yet instead of comfort, fear quietly bloomed. Because kindness always came before abandonment, didn't it? Over the following weeks, the palace began changing. Not because Ira commanded anyone, because she noticed things others ignored. A kitchen maid burned her hand. Ira treated it. A stable boy caught fever. She stayed awake all night caring for him. An elderly guard struggled with an old shoulder wound. She quietly prepared herbal medicine before sunrise. One by one, the servants stopped fearing her. Children ran toward her instead of away. Even wounded royal wolves wandered into the palace gardens looking for the gentle Omega with soft hands and patient eyes. Fenrir followed her everywhere. Soon, he wasn't alone. Then 2 wolves came. Then 6. Then 20. Before long, the palace gardens had become filled with resting wolves who had abandoned royal kennels simply to sleep near her. The soldiers whispered in disbelief. The wolves never do that. General Magnus merely smiled. They're following their instincts. Not everyone welcomed the change. Late one night, deep beneath the palace archives, Seraphine held an ancient leather-bound ledger beneath flickering candlelight. Dust danced through narrow beams of light as she carefully turned brittle pages untouched for generations. Names, bloodlines, royal seals, forgotten heirs. Most meant nothing, until one page stopped her. Her smile disappeared. The name written in faded silver ink made her pulse quicken. Ashwin. She read further. Once.
Twice.
A third time. Impossible. Her breathing slowed, then became dangerously calm. Ira Ashwin was not merely the daughter of forgotten healers. She descended from the first Moon Queen, a bloodline older than Iron Fang itself. According to the ancient succession laws abolished centuries ago, her claim to the throne surpassed even Kaelin's. Seraphine slowly closed the book. Destroying this truth would be simple, but revealing it, at exactly the right moment, would destroy far more than one woman. It would shatter the kingdom. She smiled, a slow, patient, terrifying smile. Then she walked into her private chambers. A fresh sheet of parchment waited upon her desk. She dipped a feather into black ink, carefully imitated Ira's handwriting she'd practiced for days. Every curve, every stroke. Perfect. The forged letter took shape beneath trembling candlelight. It spoke of secret meetings, hidden alliances, plans to betray the Alpha King, plans that had never existed. By dawn, the lie looked older than the truth. Seraphine sealed the letter with stolen wax, then whispered to the empty room, "Compassion may win wolves." She pressed the royal seal into cooling wax. But kingdoms belong to those willing to become monsters. Outside her window, the first snowfall of the season covered the palace in silent white. Far below, unaware of the storm gathering around her, Iris stood in the gardens, smiling as Fenrir rested peacefully with his head in her lap. She didn't see the shadow watching from the highest tower. She didn't hear the footsteps carrying the forged letter toward the royal council. She didn't know that before another moon had risen, the palace she had slowly begun to call home would become the place that broke her heart all over again. The forged letter reached the royal council before sunrise. By the time the palace bells announced the beginning of a new day, Iron Fang Palace no longer felt like a home. It felt like a courtroom. Snow drifted beyond towering stained glass windows, muffling the outside world beneath an endless blanket of white. Inside the council chamber, however, warmth had vanished completely. 40 of the kingdom's most powerful nobles stood beneath towering pillars of black granite. No one smiled. No one spoke above a whisper. Every pair of eyes remained fixed upon the parchment resting in the center of the great obsidian table. A single letter, a single eye, and a kingdom balanced on its edge. King Kael entered without ceremony. His heavy boots echoed through the chamber. Every noble immediately bowed. He ignored them. What emergency could not wait until daylight? No one answered. Finally, Lord Aldrich, the oldest council elder, lifted the sealed letter with trembling fingers. "We wished this to be false, Your Majesty." Kael accepted the parchment. His expression remained unreadable as his silver eyes scanned every line. The room became painfully still. The letter claimed Lyra had secretly exchanged messages with the Eastern Dominion. It described hidden meetings beyond the northern forest. It promised that once the Alpha King trusted her completely, she would deliver Fenrir and the royal wolves to Ironfang's greatest enemy. Every accusation was carefully written, believable, detailed, cruel. Kael read the final sentence, then read it again. His hand tightened around the parchment. Not enough to crush it, enough to wrinkle the edges. General Magnus stepped forward. "Majesty." Silence. Kael slowly lowered the letter.
Who found this?
"A palace servant." "Where?" "In Lady Lyra's chambers." Another silence. Longer this time. The king's face revealed nothing. No anger. No disbelief. No emotion at all. That frightened Magnus more than rage ever could. "You may all leave." No one moved. Lord Aldrich cleared his throat. "The council respectfully requests Lady Lyra's immediate imprisonment until—" "I said." Kaelin's voice became terrifyingly quiet. "Leave." One by one, the nobles obeyed. Only Magnus remained. The old general waited until the doors closed before speaking. "You don't believe it." Kael stared at the fire burning inside the enormous hearth. "I don't know what to believe." Those words hurt Magnus more than anything else, because for the first time, the strongest man in the kingdom sounded lost. Far across the palace gardens, Lyra knelt beneath a snow-covered oak tree, carefully wrapping a clean bandage around the injured wing of a white falcon. The bird watched her with frightened golden eyes. "There." She smiled gently. "You'll fly again." The falcon hesitated, then unexpectedly rubbed its head against her fingertips before soaring into the pale winter sky. Fenrir watched quietly from a nearby hill. His ears suddenly flattened. The wind had changed. He smelled fear. Not from enemies. From inside the palace. Without warning,
He stood.
every muscle in his enormous body tightened. A deep growl vibrated through his chest. Lyra looked up immediately. "Fenrir?" The wolf turned toward the palace. His silver eyes narrowed.
Then
He ran. Kael found Lyra in the palace greenhouse. Winter roses bloomed beneath enchanted glass, filling the warm air with a soft fragrance that reminded him of dreams he still couldn't explain. She was trimming dead leaves from a struggling flower. Completely unaware, when she noticed him, she smiled. A simple smile. Unforced. Trusting. It nearly destroyed him. "You came." She brushed dirt from her hands. "I wanted to show you something." She pointed toward a dying rosebush. It looked hopeless 3 weeks ago. Her fingers gently touched a newly opened blossom. Sometimes roots survive even when everything above them appears dead. Kael stared at the flower, then at her. The cruel irony tightened around his chest. She was speaking about the rose. He heard something else. Hope. Something he no longer knew how to hold. "Lyra." His voice sounded strangely distant. She noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" He removed the folded parchment from inside his cloak. Her smile disappeared. "What is that?" He handed it to her. She read the first lines. Her face drained of color. By the second paragraph, her hands began shaking. "This." She looked up. "I never wrote this." "I know." The answer escaped him before he realized it. Hope flickered inside her eyes. You believe me? Kaelin closed his eyes. For one heartbeat, he wanted to say yes. He wanted to burn the letter, to hold onto the impossible peace she had brought into his life. Then years of betrayal returned. His father's assassination, his brother's murder, the poisoned cup that had nearly ended his reign. Every memory whispered the same lesson. Trust gets kings killed. His silence became his answer. Lyra understood. Slowly, pain settled behind her pale blue eyes. Not explosive, not dramatic. Far worse. Quiet. You don't. Kaelin couldn't force the words out. Nothing came. She laughed softly. The sound held no joy. Do you know? Her voice trembled. How many people looked at me exactly like this? She folded the letter carefully, almost gently. My village. My family. The healers. Every person who decided I was guilty before asking a single question. Tears gathered but refused to fall. I thought. She swallowed. I thought you were different. Fenrir entered the greenhouse. The great wolf immediately sensed the distance between them. He looked from Lyra to Kaelin, then released a low, uneasy whine. Neither moved. Neither spoke. Outside, snow continued falling.
Inside,
Something far more fragile broke. That night, Lyra packed everything she owned. It took less than 10 minutes. A patched cloak, a leather satchel, her old herbal journal. Nothing else belonged to her. She stood in the tiny guest chamber overlooking the frozen gardens. This room had been warmer than her cabin.
softer.
Safer. Yet somehow, it had become lonelier. A quiet knock came at the door. General Magnus entered. His weathered face carried grief. You shouldn't leave. She smiled sadly. I've already stayed too long. The king. The king chose his duty. Magnus lowered his eyes. He is afraid. So was I. She fastened her satchel. But fear isn't an excuse to abandon someone. The old general had no answer. Before leaving, Lyra looked around the room one final time. I don't hate him. Her whisper barely reached Magnus. I just can't stay somewhere I'm only trusted when it's convenient. She walked past him. Fenrir waited in the corridor. The moment he saw the bag over her shoulder, he understood. The wolf stepped directly in front of the doorway, refusing to move. His silver eyes pleaded with her. Fenrir. She knelt beside him. You belong here. The wolf shook his head. Actually shook it, like a stubborn child. She laughed through tears.
No.
She scratched gently behind his ears. You have your king. Fenrir looked toward the distant throne room, then back at Lyra. Without hesitation, he turned his back on the palace, choosing to follow her. Again, before dawn, the massive gates of Iron Fang Palace opened. No ceremony, no farewell, only quiet footsteps disappearing into the endless snow. Lyra never looked back. She knew if she did, she might forgive him too soon. Fenrir walked beside her. Behind them, dozens of royal wolves silently abandoned the palace. One after another, they followed their commander. By sunrise, nearly half the royal wolf packs had vanished into the northern wilderness. The soldiers stared in disbelief. No command had been given, no whistle blown. The wolves had simply chosen. Hours later, Kaelin finally entered Lyra's empty chamber. The bed had been neatly made, the fireplace cleaned. Not a single complaint left behind. Only one small clay bowl remained on the windowsill. Inside it grew a tiny winter flower she had rescued from the greenhouse. Beside it, a folded piece of parchment. Not a letter, a recipe. Her favorite herbal tea, written in careful handwriting. At the bottom, only one sentence. For restless nights. I hope you eventually sleep without nightmares. Kaelin read it once. Then again. His vision blurred. The woman he had doubted had left behind healing instead of anger. He slowly sat on the edge of the empty bed. The room still carried her scent.
Pine.
Lavender.
Smoke.
Home. Something inside the Alpha King finally cracked. Not loudly. Silently. Irreversibly. A sharp knock shattered the stillness. Magnus burst into the room. His face was pale. Majesty. Kaelin stood instantly. What happened? The old general held out another parchment. Unlike the forged letter, this one was stained with blood. A messenger from the eastern border. Kaelin unfolded it. Inside was a written confession from the dying scribe Seraphine had bribed. Every forged document, every stolen seal, every false witness, every accusation against Ira had been manufactured. The confession ended with 7 devastating words. Lady Ira Ashwin is completely innocent. The parchment slipped from Kaelin's fingers. For several heartbeats, he simply stared at nothing. The palace around him seemed impossibly quiet. He remembered every moment, every hesitation, every unanswered question. Every second she had searched his face, waiting for him to believe her. And he hadn't. His knees suddenly weakened. General Magnus reached for him. The king raised one hand, stopping him.
No.
His voice broke, barely audible. I did this. Outside the palace windows, a lone wolf howled toward the frozen northern horizon. Kaelin closed his eyes. For the first time in years, the Alpha King prayed. Not for victory, not for power, not even for his kingdom, only for one impossible chance. To find the woman who had walked away before he realized she had become the heart he could no longer live without. Winter reached its cruelest form. The northern wilderness disappeared beneath endless white, where mountains stood like silent giants beneath a sky stained with iron-gray clouds. Rivers slept beneath thick sheets of ice, and every gust of wind carried the lonely songs of wolves echoing through ancient forests. 3 weeks had passed since Ira walked away from Ironfang Palace. 3 weeks, and the kingdom had begun to unravel. The palace corridors no longer echoed with confidence. Servants whispered instead of singing while they worked. The royal kennels stood nearly empty. The wolves that had once answered every command now stared silently toward the northern horizon, refusing food, refusing drills, refusing war. Even Fenrir's absence had become a wound no army could hide. The soldiers called it impossible. The elders called it prophecy. The common people called it punishment. Kaelin called it exactly what it was: his failure. Every night he dreamed of the same cabin, the same fire, the same woman whose kindness had asked for nothing in return. Only now, the dreams were different. Instead of warmth, he saw her walking farther away through endless snow. No matter how fast he ran, he never reached her. Every morning he awoke with his hand stretched toward empty air. Meanwhile, far beyond the borders of the capital, Ira had stopped running. She had started rebuilding. The abandoned mining village of Frost Hollow had once housed hundreds of families before war reduced it to broken chimneys and empty homes.
Now,
children laughed there again. Old widows cooked together beside communal fires. Injured soldiers from forgotten battles found shelter beneath repaired roofs. No banners flew above the village. No taxes were collected. No one cared whether someone was Alpha, Beta, or Omega. If they were hungry, they ate. If they were wounded, they healed. If they were alone, they belonged. Ira never declared herself their leader. They simply began following her. Not because she demanded loyalty, because she gave hope. Her healing gift had grown stronger with every act of compassion. Wounds that once required weeks now closed within days. Sick children recovered overnight. Even barren fields slowly pushed green shoots through frozen soil. The villagers whispered that the Moon Mother herself walked among them. Ira simply smiled. I only listened when people needed someone. Fenrir had become Frost Hollow's silent guardian. Every child climbed over his enormous back without fear. Every elder scratched behind his ears. Every night, he slept outside Ira's cabin, exactly as he had months ago. Only now, he wasn't guarding a frightened Omega. He was protecting the woman everyone else already saw as their queen. One icy morning, the distant sound of galloping horses shattered the village's peace. The children stopped playing. The wolves lifted their heads. Fenrir stood instantly. A scout raced into the village. Riders, he gasped. Thousands of them. The villagers froze. Ira stepped outside. On the distant ridge, black banners appeared through the snowstorm. Iron Fang banners. Behind them, another army emerged. Not black.
Crimson.
Lady Seraphine's personal legion. They weren't marching together. They were preparing for war. Back at Iron Fang Palace, Seraphine no longer bothered hiding her ambition. She stood before the royal council wearing a crown she had commissioned in secret months earlier. You all witnessed it. Her voice flowed smoothly across the chamber. The king abandoned diplomacy. He abandoned judgment. He abandoned the throne for an Omega. Several frightened nobles nodded. He is no longer fit to rule. Lord Aldrich hesitated. Lady Seraphine, the wolves have deserted. The northern villages refuse taxation. The military is dividing. She stepped closer. The kingdom requires certainty. Not love. Not mercy.
Power.
And if His Majesty cannot provide it, she placed one elegant hand upon the throne. Someone else will. Half the council knelt. The other half remained standing. Civil war had begun. Hours later, the two armies met outside Frost Hollow beneath a blood-red moon. Snow fell softly between thousands of soldiers. Steel glimmered beneath torchlight. Wolves gathered along the surrounding cliffs. The air smelled of pine, cold iron, and approaching death. Ira stood before the villagers. She carried no sword, no armor, only the same white cloak she had worn the day she found Fenrir. Kaelin rode alone ahead of his army. When he saw her, the battlefield disappeared. The shouting, the banners, the soldiers. None of it mattered. She was alive. For one long moment, neither moved. Then Kaelin dismounted, without guards, without weapons, without his crown. He removed it slowly. The silver crown of Iron Fang reflected the crimson moon before he placed it gently upon the snow. Thousands of soldiers watched in stunned silence. No Alpha King had ever removed his crown before battle. Kaelin walked forward alone. Each step carried years of regret, years of pride, years of loneliness, until only a few feet separated them. His silver eyes never left hers. I came too late. His voice was rough. I know, Ira answered quietly. The words hurt more than accusation ever could. He slowly lowered himself onto one knee. Gasps rippled through both armies. The undefeated conqueror, the beast of Iron Fang,
Knelt.
not before another king, not before a god. Before the Omega, he had failed. I cannot erase what I did. His voice trembled for the first time in his life. I cannot ask you to forget. Snow settled across his dark hair. But if redemption is something earned. He lowered his head. Allow me to spend the rest of my life earning it. Silence. Only the wind answered. Tears shimmered inside Ira's eyes. Not because he knelt, because for the first time, he wasn't speaking as a king. He was speaking as a broken man. Before she could answer, a scream shattered the moment. Seraphine raised her sword. Archers. Hundreds of flaming arrows darkened the sky. They choose love over power. Her voice echoed across the valley. So, let them burn together. The first arrows fell. Chaos exploded. Battle erupted beneath the crimson moon. Steel collided against steel. War wolves leaped into combat. Villagers fought beside royal soldiers. The earth shook beneath thousands of pounding feet. Seraphine smiled. This was exactly what she wanted. Confusion.
Fear. Blood.
She rode directly toward Ira. If I cannot have the throne, she drew a poisoned dagger. Neither will you. Time seemed to slow. Kaelin saw the blade. He moved without thought, throwing himself between them. The dagger buried itself deep beneath his ribs. A sharp gasp escaped Ira. Kaelin staggered. Blood spread rapidly across black armor. Seraphine laughed. Even kings bleed. Before she could strike again, Fenrir appeared. The legendary werewolf crashed into her horse like a thunderbolt. The animal reared violently. Seraphine was thrown into the snow. Her sword disappeared beneath drifting ice. She reached desperately for another weapon, then stopped. Hundreds of wolves surrounded her. Every pair of silver eyes glowed beneath the red moon. No growls, no attacks, only judgment. The wolves had already chosen. Lyra caught Kaelen before he collapsed. His blood soaked into her cloak. No. Her voice broke. Please. Kaelen smiled weakly. I finally, he coughed, protected you. She pressed trembling hands against the wound. Warm tears fell onto his chest. The world around her faded. Only his heartbeat remained.
Weak.
Slowing. The Moon Mother's words returned from childhood. True healing demands true sacrifice. Lyra closed her eyes. For the first time, she stopped resisting the power sleeping inside her soul. Moonlight descended from the crimson sky. Silver light wrapped around her body. The wind stopped. The wolves fell silent. Every soldier lowered their weapon. Warm light spread from Lyra's hands into Kaelen's wounded body. Not violent magic. Not destruction. Pure compassion. The light continued growing. Across the battlefield, old scars disappeared. Broken bones mended. Poison vanished from wounded soldiers. Fear itself seemed to dissolve beneath impossible peace. Enemies slowly lowered their swords. Some began crying without understanding why. Others embraced companions they had tried to kill moments before. The war ended. Not because one side won. Because hatred simply no longer found a place to live. Seraphine watched everything collapse around her. Years of manipulation. Years of ambition. Years of carefully crafted lies. Destroyed. By one woman's refusal to hate. She laughed. Then cried. Then laughed again. The madness inside her finally consumed the only kingdom she had ever truly ruled. Her own heart. Royal guards quietly placed chains around her wrists. She offered no resistance. She had already lost long before the battle began. Dawn painted the mountains gold. The first sunrise after the longest winter. Kaelen slowly opened his eyes.
Alive.
The wound had vanished. Only a faint silver mark remained above his heart. Lyra sat beside him.
Exhausted.
Smiling. He reached for her hand. This time, she didn't pull away. I still have much to earn, he whispered. She nodded. You do. A tiny smile appeared on his face. But she looked toward the villagers. The soldiers. The wolves resting peacefully together beneath the morning sun. You've already taken the first step. Kaelen picked up the fallen crown. He didn't place it on his own head. Instead, he held it out to her. I offer you the throne. Lyra looked at the ancient crown, then gently closed his fingers around it. I don't want your throne. Kaelen blinked. I want your promise. Anything. Her blue eyes met his. No child will ever be abandoned because they're born in Omega. No healer will ever be called weak. No ruler will ever measure someone's worth by blood alone. Kaelen's answer came, without hesitation. I swear it. Before the wolves. Before the kingdom. Before the Moon Mother herself. I swear. Lyra finally smiled. A real smile. The kind that reached her eyes. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. The mountains echoed with a single howl. Fenrir stood atop the highest ridge, lifting his head toward the brightening sky. One wolf answered, then another, then hundreds. Within moments, every wolf across Iron Fang Kingdom sang together. Not for victory, not for conquest,
For home.
The years that followed changed the North forever. The kingdom no longer remembered Lyra as the forgotten Omega abandoned in a snowstorm. They remembered her as the queen the wolves chose. Children learned her story beside winter fires. Not because she married the Alpha King, but because she proved that compassion could accomplish what fear never could. As for Kaelen, history no longer called him the Beast of Iron Fang. His people gave him a different name, the King who learned to kneel. And whenever winter covered the northern forests in fresh snow, travelers sometimes claimed they could still hear two heartbeats carried together by the wind. One belonged to a king, the other to the Omega who had first saved a blinded war wolf, and in doing so, saved an entire kingdom.
The end.